Hi there, this is Mike, and what I want to do is I want to explain how to box items off using with your HTML code and Cascading Style Sheets. You probably are used to working with tables to create your basic layouts of your web page design, and tables are a very simple way to go. And if you need something quick and easy, I always suggest going in and put a table in, incorporate your graphics, incorporate your text. It's very simple to do. But with cascading style sheets, you get a little more flexibility. It's more efficient to start working with cascading style sheets to actually create your layout. And the thing that we have to remember as we're doing this is that you kind of have to treat every heading, every paragraph text, every image as its own element. And once you think of it that way, then you can take each of the paragraph and position it somewhere else. You can add a color to it, to the background. You can go in and change so the heading is over here on the left hand side and not on the right. So it all depends on what you're trying to do when you're working with your layout. But if you keep everything in the back of your mind that the code or the text itself is separate elements, then it makes it a little bit easier to understand. So if we take each paragraph in a Word document, think about each paragraph in a Word document, like I have here. Well, we have these invisible elements that we can add to it, that we can control with HTML and cascading style sheets. So one of the things that we can do, like with this paragraph, now remember, in HTML, we're going to have this as like with a P tag starting off, and then at the ending, have the closing P tag. We don't see the code yet, and we will and eventually here in a second. I'll go in and work with that. But in this case, we have a paragraph, and we have certain elements we control. One of the options we have here is this black border that goes around. If we don't indicate that this should have a black border, then it's going to be invisible and you won't know it's there. And so it'll be just treated like regular text in a Word document. It just goes from one section to another. You can also go in and set up the control, the color of the border, the thickness of the border. So there's other attributes you can add to that. What you should probably start understanding is these main elements first, and then go in and do a little more research and say, okay, what else can I change about those elements? So don't go in and try to memorize everything about a border. Just understand that each of these paragraph texts, you can control that. Another aspect you can control is the margin. And the margin is outside the actual element. So if you had two paragraphs side by side, between the paragraphs would be the margin. So why do we put margin in? So we don't have the text over top of each other. So we have a little extra space in between to help make it readable. We also have an option called padding, which is inside the element, so it's right between the text and the border. So that way your text is not right on the border, and that again makes it a little bit harder to read. So typically you're going to have a little extra padding involved as well. So if you understand this component that every section or every element, object that you have in your page has these elements that you can control, then you can go back in and make some adjustments. So let's try this out. Let me open up, I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to open up my notepad. I'm going to open up my browser. And what I have is a simple basic HTML code over here on the left hand side. And this is what it's going to view like here on the right. So I got simply all I have here is basic text, and up here I have a style tag which has three styles, and all it is lining it centered. And you can see over here to the right, web news, web developers are centered on the page. So nothing major there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and get a little more control over aligning my text, positioning my text. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the margin command. So I'm just going to type in margin colon 1EM. Don't forget your semicolon. And what's going to happen here is it's going to put a margin around that. Again, you can't see it, can you? Because there's an invisible section around your text. Now, where's it going to put it around? It's going to put it around H1, which would be web news. So let's save it. Now, when I click on refresh over here on the right hand side, watch what happens. Notice how web news moves down a little bit. Okay, so what you're saying is you want that extra space all around the text, just the web news itself, because that's the only H1 we have. So we put a little extra margin. So you're going to see it move down from the top. Now, if it was in the middle of the text, you'll see the same thing. The text will move down, and if you had any text on the left or right, it would also, you will see adjustment to that. Now, when you leave the set as margin, it puts the 1M all the way around the text. So that's what's default. Now we can actually go in and control certain sides to have certain margins. So I can actually go into H2 and I'm going to put in margin hyphen bottom. And you know, most books and tutorials will have all the information. So if you're going to do margin top, margin left, margin right, you type in margin hyphen right, left, top. So here I'm just going to do same thing, except I'm going to type in 1EM for just the bottom. I'm going to save it. And so what I'm doing different here is I'm not putting that same spacing around the whole text. I'm putting it just at the bottom. So over here where it says web developers, you should see a little extra space come up right below. So let's do a refresh. And notice how that simple syntax moved down just a little bit. Again, we're trying to control our spacing and our design with that. So let's see what happens if we add a little padding into it as well. Again, this is all based on that graphic that we've seen. So I'm going to put in the word padding. And this time I'm going to control the top portion. Again, very similar to what we see above with margin. So you can control the top, bottom, left, and right. I'm going to put 0.5 EM, colon. And then I'm also going to incorporate a little extra padding at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Let's take a look what happens over here on the right. And just again, it's kind of looks like what it did with margin, but if we had a border around that, you will see what it looks like. So let's add a border. So I'm going to come over here in H3, and very simple, I'm going to put a border to the top, and I'm going to put a border at the bottom. Now if you just leave the the attribute called border, it puts the border around the whole element. So in this case, it would put it around simple syntax, powerful design tool. Here I'm going to control by putting it around the areas I want. So in this case, I'm going to do a top border. I'm going to put in the attribute solid thin. Again, the book talks about it, tutorials. So I'm not going to go and explore more of the attributes, but just kind of as we're working with that. So let's do a border at the bottom. Again, same as margins and the padding, just put the hyphen bottom, hyphen top. Now in the book, I mentioned in the beginning, I'll have it listed so that anybody's using, if you don't have the book or access to it, I'll list out the book. But it does give you all the listings of what you can actually add into your coding itself. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the 0.5 EM. Now, I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now watch what happens. Now we're looking at simple syntax here. So let's refresh it. And I did make a mistake with my bottom border. So I will change that in just a second. You'll notice that the top border, it comes right above it where it says simple syntax as we're working with this. And the thing I forgot, I got all mistaken here. And notice what I did here with the bottom border. I went in and typed in 0.5 EM. Well, that's not an attribute for for the border. So I have to actually tell it to style. So I have to actually go in and tell it to be solid thin. When you're working with a lot of these codes, sometimes you'll make a mistake like that. So you just go in, and you see what I'm doing is I type in the code, I come over and I click on refresh so I can see what's going on. And that helps me troubleshoot as I go. So let me go ahead and save. I refresh, and there I got a top and bottom border. So again, we're just seeing what we can work with there. Now let's actually see what we can do with changing some margin controls. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to my text here, and I'm just going to turn on this for the notepad. I'm going to turn on the text wrap option so that way I can see what I'm working with. So I don't have to scroll all the way over to the right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move, look at where the lines above simple syntax in. I'm going to move those in, as well as if the text went all the way to the edge, that would also move in. And I'm going to control it by changing the margin like I did for H1 and H2. Now I didn't put any margin in for H3 yet, so that's what I'm going to do right now. So now I'm going to tell it to be margin left. Now let's just do the left right now. I'm going to save it. Okay, I want you to look at the left-hand side of the ruler here, the lines here. When I refresh, look how that moves in. So let's put that colon in and let's do another one. Let's do margin right. Now let me save it. Watch what happens on the right side and see how it's moved in on both. Now notice how the main paragraph of text is still all the way on the edges. So if you wanted to add that same control, then we need to add the margin left and margin right to the paragraph tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here in my style sheet. I'm going to put the P in, put that bracket in, and here I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to copy and paste my code. So I'm going to copy the text. I'm going to come down and paste it. Now I'm using Control C and Control V as in Valentine. If you're on a Mac, Command C, Command V. Then I'm going to put the closing bracket in. Now let's save it. Let's come over and refresh. Now look at the two main paragraphs down here at the bottom. This is the first line of the article. Watch what happens. See how both is indented in automatically. So here we're trying again line things up to make it a little bit easier to work with. So again, what I'm trying to do is show you how to use those margins to control those elements. Now, some other things that you can do here based on a lot of your reading and so forth, and again, it's not too bad. I'm going to do a couple other things with this to go in and make some adjustments to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this text, simple syntax, powerful design tool, I'm going to make it move over to the left of my paragraphs. I'm going to move it over to the left. So I'm going to control the position with what we call the float element. The float. Now, since I'm working with H3, I have to place it into the H3 tag. So I'm going to come here in H3, and I'm basically going to go in, and I'm going to type in float, colon, left, semicolon. Now, you could use right, and that would actually move it to the right of the paragraph. If you want to think of this, if you're a graphic designer and you know certain terms, it's like text wrap or word wrap is what we're doing, but we're physically telling it what side to go on. So here, I'm going to go in and have it move to the left, and once I save it and I refresh it over here, you see it's moved over here to the left hand side. See how you can get better control of the layout? Now what I'm going to do here to make it a little more interesting, why don't we control the width and height of this heading 3 area section. So to do that, just add width. I'm going to type in height. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Let's look at it. And notice how I've increased the width and height. Now I moved everything around, so now both paragraphs are going to be wrapped around that heading. So I'm controlling the size of that section. And in this case, it's the size of H3. This is the reason why a lot of people are going to create different classes. So you might have three different, classes for H3. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back in. Let's just enhance it a little bit more. Let me add some color. And it's kind of more obvious when you're adding these attributes. You notice how it's like margin right, margin left, background, color. And I'm using hexadecimal to define my colors. Let's go ahead and save it. Refresh. And now this is where the padding will come in play. The padding is going to be the inside border here, right to the left of the S in simple and at the end of the comma. So if you want to increase that, you can go back and modify it by increasing the padding. The margin is going to be outside, between the outside of the element and the main text over here on the right hand side. So that's one control. Now notice that I can also, another thing that you have to pay attention to too is notice that this area is not aligning up to where this is the first line of the article. Some people want to, some people don't, and that's all controlled by the margin. So if I go into my code and I type in margin top, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just simply going to put in, I'm going to make it move up, and I can't type in a number. I have to actually go and do it. Well, you are going to type a number, but you're going to type in a negative amount. So if you do positive, it's going to move it down. Negative is going to move it up. And it's the same thing left and right. So if you actually have a negative, it'll actually move it to the left. Typically by default, it moves it to the right. So here, watch what happens. I save it. Now watch this whole section move up. Went too far. Well, what do I do? Well, try 5 pixels. Refresh it. So you get the idea. So go to 1, and just experiment. And this is why I like to do is I come in, I adjust it accordingly. So now you could try pixels. If you need a little bit closer, maybe you have to do 0.5. Let's do 0.5 here. So I'm not getting exactly, but that's all right. So it's going in and knowing how to control that. And that's the beauty of working with box elements here, is that we're going in and we're telling it exactly where we want it positioned. We're telling it what the size is. We're giving it more controls about the margins and paddings. But as you're learning this, make sure you understand the basics first, and that is the control of each element. Padding, margins, border. Then you can add color. Then you can add width and height. Then you can float it. But understand the basics first, and then you can go in and make those changes. I hope that makes a little bit better sense when you start looking at it and reading in your book about the information. And if you have any questions, I'll see you in class.